Welcome to Virgo Potens. This is part 3 of the Mystical City of God by Venerable Mary of Agreda, where heaven reveals the mystery of the Immaculate Conception and the birth of the Virgin Mary, chosen to crush the serpent's head. The Immaculate Conception. In the tribunal of the divine will, as the inevitable source and universal cause of the whole creation, all things with their conditions and circumstances are decreed and determined, so that nothing is forgotten, and no created power can in the least impede the fulfillment of the decree. All the spheres and the inhabitants contained in them are dependent on this ineffable government that rules them and cooperates with the natural causes unfailingly and unerringly in all that must be done. God works in all and sustains all by his sole will. In him lies the preservation of all things, or their annihilation. For, without him, they would return to the non-existence from which they were drawn. But since he has created the universe for his glory, and for the glory of the incarnate Word, therefore he has from the beginning opened the paths, and prearranged the ways by which the same Word should lower himself to assume human flesh, and to live among men, and by which they might ascend toward God, know him, fear him, seek him, serve him, love him, praise him, and enjoy him eternally. As the opportune and preordained time had arrived, the three divine persons conferred with each other, saying, "Now is the time to begin the work of our pleasure, and to call into existence that pure creature and that soul, which is to find grace in our eyes above all the rest. Let us furnish her with richest gifts, and let us deposit in her the great treasures of our grace, since all others, whom we called into existence, have turned out ungrateful and rebellious to our wishes, frustrating our intention and impeding by their own fault our purpose, namely, that they conserve themselves in the happy state of their first parents. And since it is not proper that our will should be entirely frustrated, let us therefore create this being in entire sanctity and perfection, so that the disorder of the first sin shall have no part in her. Let us create a soul according to our pleasure, a fruit of our attributes, a marvel of our infinite power, without touch or blemish of the sin of Adam. Let us perfect a work which is the object of our omnipotence, and a pattern of the perfection intended for our children, and the finishing crown of creation. All have sinned in the free will and resolve of the first man. Let her be the sole creature in whom we restore and execute that which by they in their aberration have lost. Let her be a most special image and likeness of our divinity, and let her be in our presence for all eternity the culmination of our good will and pleasure. In her we deposit all the prerogatives and graces which in our first and conditional resolve we had destined for the angels and men, if they had remained in their first estate. What they have lost we renew in that creature, and we will add to these gifts many others. Thus our first decree shall not be frustrated, but it shall be fulfilled in a higher manner through this our first and chosen one. And since we assigned and prepared the most perfect and estimable of our gifts for the creatures who have lost them, we will divert the stream of our bounty to our well-beloved. We will set her apart from the ordinary law, by which the rest of the mortals are brought into existence. For in her the seed of the serpent shall have no part. I will descend from heaven into her womb, and in it vest myself from her substance with human nature. It is befitting and due to the infinite goodness of our divinity that it be founded and enclosed in the most pure matter, untouched and unstained by fault. Nor is it proper that our equity and providence overlook what is most apt, perfect, and holy, and choose that which is inferior, since nothing can resist our will. The Word, which is to become man, being the Redeemer and Teacher of men, must lay the foundation of the most perfect law of grace, and must teach through it that the father and mother are to be obeyed and honored as the secondary causes of the natural existence of man. The law is first to be fulfilled by the divine Word, by honoring her as his chosen mother, by exalting her with a powerful arm, and lavishing upon her the most admirable, most holy, and most excellent of all graces and gifts. Among these shall be the most singular honor and blessing of not subjecting her to our enemy, nor to his malice, and therefore she shall be free from the death of sin. On earth the Word shall have a mother without a father, as in heaven he has a father without a mother. And in order that there may be the proper correspondence, proportion, and consonance in calling God his Father, and this woman his mother, we desire that the highest correspondence and approach possible between a creature and its God be established. Therefore at no time shall the dragon boast of being superior to the woman, whom God will obey as his true mother. This dignity of being free from sin is due and corresponds to that of being the mother of the Word, and it is in itself even more estimable and useful. It is a greater good to be holy than to be only mother, but all sanctity and perfection is nevertheless due to the motherhood of God. The human flesh, from which he is to assume form, must be free from sin. Since he is to redeem in it the sinners, he must not be under the necessity of redeeming his own flesh like that of sinners. Being united to the divinity, his humanity is to be the price of redemption. Wherefore it before all be preserved from sin. And we have already foreseen and accepted the merits of the Word in this very flesh and human nature. We wish that for all eternities the Word should be glorified through this tabernacle and habitation of the human nature. She is to be the daughter of the first man, but in the order of grace she is to be singularly free and exempt from fault, and in the order of nature she is to be most perfect, and to be formed according to a special providence. And since the incarnate Word is to be the teacher of humility and holiness, and for this end is to endure labors, confounding the vanity and deceitful fallacies of mortals, by choosing for himself sufferings as the treasure most estimable in our eyes, we wish that she, who is to be his mother, experience the same labors and difficulties, that she be singularly distinguished in patience, admirable in sufferings, and that she, in union with the only begotten, offer the acceptable sacrifices of sorrow to us for her greater glory. Now the time has arrived, added his Majesty, which was resolved upon by our providence for bringing to light the creature most pleasing and acceptable to our eyes, that creature in whom the human nature is freed from its first sin, who is to crush the head of the dragon, who was typified by that singular sign, the woman that appeared in the heavens in our presence, and who is to clothe the eternal Word with human flesh. The hour is at hand, so blessed for mortals, in which the treasures of our divinity are to be opened and the gates of heaven to be unlocked. Let the rigor of our justice be softened by the chastisements which we have until now executed upon mortals. let the attribute of our mercy become manifest. Let the creatures be enriched, and let the divine word merit for them the treasures of grace and of eternal glory. Now let the human race receive the repairer, the teacher, the brother and friend, to be life for mortals, a medicine for the sick, a counselor for the sorrowful, a balsam for the wounded, a guide and companion for those in difficulties. Let now the prophecies of our servants and the promises made to them that we would send a Savior to redeem them be fulfilled. And in order that all may be executed according to our good pleasure, and that we may be giving a beginning to the mystery hidden since the constitution of the world, we select for the formation of our beloved Mary the womb of our servant Anne. In her be she conceived, and in her let that most blessed soul be created. Although her generation and formation shall proceed according to the usual order of natural propagation, it shall be different in the order of grace, according to the ordainment of our almighty power. You do already know how the ancient serpent, since he saw that sign of this marvelous woman, attempts to circumvent all women, and how, from the first one created, he persecutes all those whom he sees excelling in the perfection of their works and life, expecting to find among them the one who is to crush his head. When he shall encounter this most pure and spotless creature, he shall find her so holy that he will exert all his powers to persecute her in pursuance of the concept which he forms of her. But the arrogance of this dragon shall be greater than his powers, and it is our will that you have particular charge of this our holy city and tabernacle of the incarnate Word, protecting, guarding, assisting, and defending her against our enemies, and that you enlighten, strengthen, and console her with all due solicitude and reverence as long as she shall be a wayfarer among the mortals. At this proposal of the Most High, all the holy angels, prostrate before the royal throne of the Most Holy Trinity, avowed their promptitude and eagerness to obey the divine mandate. Each one desired in holy emulation to be appointed, and offered himself for such a happy service. All of them gave to the Almighty praise and thanksgiving in new songs, because the hour had arrived for the fulfillment of that for which they had, with the most ardent desires, prayed through many ages. I perceived on this occasion that from the time of that great battle of St. Michael with the dragon and his allies, in which they were hurled into everlasting darkness, while the hosts of Michael remained victorious and confirmed in grace and glory, these holy spirits commenced immediately to pray for the fulfillment of the mysteries of the incarnation of the Word, of which they became cognizant at the time. And they persevered in these oft-repeated prayers up to the hour in which God manifested to them the fulfillment of their desires and petitions. On this account, the celestial spirits at this new revelation conceived an additional joy, and obtained new accidental glory, and they spoke to the Lord. Most high and incomprehensible God and Lord, thou art worthy of all reverence, praise, and eternal glory. And we are thy creatures, and made according to thy divine will. Send us, most powerful Lord, to execute thy most wonderful works and mysteries, in order that in all things thy most just pleasure may be fulfilled. In such terms of affection, the heavenly princes acknowledged themselves as subjects, and, if it had been possible, they desired to increase in purity and perfection in order to be more worthy guardians and servants of Mary. Then the Most High chose and appointed those who were to be occupied in this exalted service, the guardianship of Mary, from each of the 9 choirs of angels. He selected 100, being 900 in all. Moreover, he assigned 12 others who should in a special manner assist Mary in corporeal and visible forms. And they were to bear the emblems or eschatons of the redemption. These are the 12 which are mentioned in the 21st chapter of the Apocalypse as guarding the portals of the city. Of them I will speak in the explanation of that chapter later on. Besides these, the Lord assigned 18 other angels, selected from the highest ranks, who were to ascend and descend by that mystical stairs of Jacob with the message of the Queen to His Majesty and those of the Lord to her. In addition to all these holy angels, the Almighty assigned and appointed 70 seraphim, choosing them from the highest ranks and from those nearest to the divinity, in order that they might communicate and converse with this Princess of Heaven in the same way as they themselves have intercourse with each other, and as the higher communicate with the lower ones. In order that this invincible warrior troop might be well appointed, Saint Michael, the prince of the heavenly militia, was placed at their head, and although not always in the company of the Queen, he was nevertheless often near her, and often showed himself to her. The Almighty destined him as a special ambassador of Christ our Lord, and to act in some of the mysteries as the defender of his most holy mother. In a like manner, the holy Prince Gabriel was appointed to act as legate and minister of the Eternal Father in the affairs of the Princess of Heaven. Thus did the Most Holy Trinity provide for the custody and the defense of the Mother of God. The divine wisdom had now prepared all things for drawing forth the spotless image of the Mother of Grace from the corruption of nature. The number and congregation of ancient patriarchs and prophets had been completed and gathered, and the mountains had been raised, on which the mystical city of God was to be built. By the power of his right hand, he had already selected incomparable treasures of the divinity to enrich and endow her. 1,000 angels were equipped for her guard and custody, that they might serve as the most faithful vessels of their Queen and Lady. He had provided a noble and kingly ancestry from whom she should descend, and had selected for her most holy and perfect parents, than whom none holier or more perfect could be found in the world. For there is no doubt that if better and more apt parents existed, the Almighty would have selected them for her, who was to be chosen by God as his mother. In the formation of the body of the Most Holy Mary, the wisdom and power of the Almighty proceeded so cautiously that the quantities of the 4 natural elements of the human body, the sanguine, melancholic, phlegmatic, and choleric, were compounded in exact proportion and measure, in order that by this most perfect proportion in its mixture and composition it might assist the operations of that holy soul with which it was to be endowed and animated. This wonderfully composed temperament was afterwards the source and the cause, which, in its own way, made possible the serenity and peace that reigned in the powers and faculties of the Queen of Heaven during all her life. Never did any of these elements oppose or contradict, nor seek to predominate over the others, but each one of them supplemented and served the others, continuing in this well-ordered fabric without corruption or decay. Never did the body of the Most Holy Mary suffer from the taint of corruption, nor was there anything wanting or anything excessive found in it, but all the conditions and proportions of the different elements were continuously adjusted, without any want or excess in what was necessary for her perfect existence, and without excess or default in dryness or moisture. Neither was there more warmth than was necessary for maintenance of life or digestion, nor more cold than was necessary for the right temperature and for the maintenance of the bodily humours. On the Saturday next following, the Almighty created the soul of his mother and infused it into the body, and thus entered into the world that pure creature, more holy, perfect, and agreeable to his eyes than all those he had created, or will create to the end of the world, or through the eternities. God maintained a mysterious correspondence in the execution of this work with that of creating all the rest of the world in 7 days, as is related in the book of Genesis. Then, no doubt, he rested in truth, according to the figurative language of Scripture, since he has now created the most perfect creature of all, giving through it a beginning to the work of the divine Word and to the redemption of the human race. Thus was this day a paschal feast for God, and also for all creatures. By the force of this divine pronouncement, and through the love with which it issued from the mouth of the Almighty, was created and infused into the body of the most holy Mary, her most blessed soul. At the same time, she was filled with grace and gifts above those of the highest seraphim of heaven, and there was not a single instant in which she was found wanting or deprived of the light, the friendship, and the love of the Creator, or in which she was touched by the stain or darkness of original sin. On the contrary, she was possessed of the most perfect justice, superior to that of Adam and Eve in their first formation. To her was also concealed the most perfect use of the light of reason, corresponding to the gifts of grace which she had received. Not for one instant was she to remain idle, but to engage in works most admirable and pleasing to her Maker. Although she was adorned as the bride, descending from heaven, endowed with all perfections, and with the whole range of infused virtues, it was not necessary that she should exercise all of them at once, it being sufficient that she exercise those which were befitting her state in the womb of her mother. Among the first thus exercised were the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, which relate immediately to God. These she at once practiced in the most exalted manner, recognizing by a most sublime faith the divinity with all the perfections and its infinite attributes, and the Trinity with its distinction of persons. This knowledge by faith was not impeded by the higher knowledge which God gave her, as I will soon demonstrate. She exercised also the virtue of hope, seeing in God the object of her happiness and her ultimate end. Towards this her sanctified soul at once hastened, and aspired, with the most intense desires of uniting herself with God, and without having for one moment turned to any other object, or tarried one moment in her upward flight. At the same instant also she put into action the virtue of charity, seeing in God the infinite and highest good, and conceiving such an intense appreciation of the divinity, that not all the seraphim could ever reach such an eminent degree of fervor and virtue. The other virtues which adorn and perfect the rational part of the creature, she possessed in a proportion corresponding to the theological virtues. The moral and natural virtues were hers in a miraculous and supernatural measure, and in a still more exalted manner was she possessed of the gifts and fruits of the Holy Ghost, in order of grace. She had an infused knowledge and habit of all these virtues, and of all the natural arts, so that she knew and was conversant with the whole natural and supernatural order of things, in accordance with the grandeur of God. Hence, from her first instant in the womb of her mother, she was wiser, more prudent, more enlightened, and more capable of comprehending God and all his works than all the creatures have been or ever will be in eternity, excepting, of course, her most holy Son. In correspondence with this wonderful knowledge of her most holy soul at the instant of its union with the body, Mary exerted herself by eliciting heroic acts of virtue, of incomparable admiration, praise, glorification, adoration, humility, love of God, and sorrow for sins committed against him, whom she recognized as the author and end of these admirable works. She hastened to offer herself as an acceptable sacrifice to the Most High, beginning from that instant with fervent desire to bless him, love him, and honor him, because she perceived that the bad angels and bad men failed to know and love him. She requested the holy angels, whose queen she already was, to help her to glorify the Creator and Lord of all, and to pray also for her. The Lord in this instant showed her also her guardian angels, whom she recognized and accepted with joyful submission, inviting them to sing canticles of praise to the Most High, alternatively with her. She announced to them beforehand that this was to be the service which they were to render her during the whole time of her mortal life, in which they were to act as her assistants and guards. She was informed, moreover, of her whole genealogy, of all the rest of the holy people chosen by God, the patriarchs and prophets, and how admirable his majesty was in the gifts, graces, and favors wrought on them. It is worthy of admiration that, although the exterior faculties of her body at the creation of her most holy soul were hardly large enough to be distinguished, nevertheless, in order that none of the miraculous excellence with which God could endow his mother might be wanting, he ordained by the power of right hand that in perceiving the fall of man she shed tears of sorrow in the womb of her mother at the gravity of the offense against the highest good. In this wonderful sorrow, at the instant of her coming into existence, she began to seek a remedy for mankind, and commenced the work of mediation, intercession, and reparation. She offered to God the clamors of her ancestors and of the just of the earth, that this mercy might not delay the salvation of mortals, whom she even looked upon as her brethren. Before she ever conversed with them with the most ardent charity, and with the very beginning of her existence, she assumed the office of benefactress of men, and exercised the divine and fraternal love enkindled in her heart. These petitions the Most High accepted with greater pleasure than the prayers of all the saints and angels, and this pleasure of God was also made known to her, who was created to be the mother of God. She perceived the love of God and his desire to descend from heaven in order to redeem men, though she knew not how it should be consummated. It was befitting that God should feel himself impelled to hasten this coming on account of the prayers and petitions of this creature, since it was principally for the love of her that he came, and since in her body he was to assume human flesh, accomplish the most admirable of all his works, and fulfill the end of all other creatures. In writing of these sacraments of the King, howsoever honorable it is to reveal his works, I confess my inaptitude and incapacity, being only a woman, and I am afflicted, because I am speaking in such common and vague terms, which fall entirely short of that which I perceive in the light given to my soul for the understanding of these mysteries. In order to do justice to such sublimity, there were need of other words, more particular and especially adapted terms and expressions, which are beyond my ignorance. And even if they were at my service, they would be weighed down and made insipid by human weakness. Let therefore this human imbecility acknowledge itself unequal and incapable of fixing its eyes on this heavenly sun, with which the rays of the divinity break upon the world, although yet be clouded in the maternal womb of holy Anne. If we seek permission to approach this wonderful sight, Let us come near free and unshackled. Let us not allow ourselves to be detained, neither by our natural cowardice, nor by a base fear and hesitation, even though it be under the cloak of humility. Let us all approach with the greatest devotion and piety, free from the spirit of contention. Then we will be permitted to examine with our own eyes the fire of the divinity burning in the bush without consuming it. Words of the Queen. It is an act of justice due to the eternal God that the creature coming to the use of reason direct its very first movement toward God. By knowing, it should begin to love him, reverence him, and adore him as its Creator and only true Lord. The parents are naturally bound to instruct their children from their infancy in this knowledge of God, and to direct them with solicitous care, so that they may at once see their ultimate end, and see it in their first acts of the intellect and will. They should, with great watchfulness, withdraw them from the childishness and puerile trickishness to which depraved nature will incline them, if left without direction. If the fathers and mothers would be solicitous to prevent these vanities and perverted habits of their children, and would instruct them from their infancy in the knowledge of their God and Creator, then they would afterwards easily accustom them to know and adore him. My holy mother, who knew not of my wisdom and real condition, was most solicitously beforehand in this matter, for when she bore me in her womb, she adored in my name the Creator, and offered worship and thanks for his having created me, beseeching him to defend me, and bringing me forth to the light of day from the condition in which I then was. So also parents should pray with fervor to God, that the souls of their children, through his providence, may obtain baptism and be freed from the servitude of original sin. And if the rational creature has not known and adored the Creator from the first dawn of reason, it should do this as soon as it obtains knowledge of the essential God by the light of faith. From that very moment, the soul must exert itself never to lose him from her sight, always fearing him, loving him, and reverencing him. The Blessed Birth of Mary Immaculate. The Most Holy Mary, being conceived without sin as described above, was entirely absorbed in spirit and entranced by her first vision of the divinity. At the first instant, and in that narrow dwelling of the maternal womb, began the love of God in her most blessed soul, never to be interrupted, but to continue through all the eternities of that high glory, which she now enjoys at the right hand of her divine Son. The most happy mother, Holy Anne, passed the days of her pregnancy altogether spiritualized by the divine operations and by the sweet workings of the Holy Ghost in all her faculties. Divine Providence, however, in order to direct her course to greater merit and reward, ordained that the ballast of trouble be not wanting. For without it the cargo of grace and love is scarcely ever secure. In order to understand better what happened to this holy woman, it must be remembered that Satan, after he was hurled with the other bad angels from heaven into the infernal torments, never ceased, during the reign of the old law, to search through the earth, hovering with lurking vigilance above the women of distinguished holiness, in order to find her, whose sign he had seen, Genesis 3:15, and whose heel was to bruise and crush his head. Lucifer's wrath against men was so fierce that he would not trust this investigation to his inferiors alone, but leaving them to operate against the virtuous women in general, he himself attended to this matter and assiduously hovered around those who signalized themselves more particularly in the exercise of virtue and in the grace of the Most High. Filled with malice and astuteness, He observed closely the exceeding great holiness of the excellent matron Anne, and all the events of her life, and although he could not estimate the richness of the treasure which was enclosed in her blessed womb, since the Lord has concealed this as well as many mysteries from him, yet he felt a powerful influence proceeding from St. Anne. The fact that he could not penetrate into the source of this activity threw him at times into greater fury and rage. At other times he quieted himself with the thought that this pregnancy arose from the same causes as others in the course of nature, and that there was no special cause for alarm, for the Lord left him to his own hallucinations and to the vagaries of his own fury. Nevertheless, the whole event was a source of great misgiving to this perverse spirit, when he saw how quietly her pregnancy took its course, and especially when he saw that many angels stood in attendance. Above all, he was enraged at his weakness in resisting the force which proceeded from the blessed Anne, and he suspected that it was not she alone who was the cause of it. Filled with this mistrust, the dragon determined, if possible, to take the life of the most felicitous Anne, or, if that was impossible, to see that she should obtain little satisfaction from her pregnancy. For the pride of Lucifer was so boundless as to persuade him of his ability to overcome or take away the life of her, who was to be the mother of the incarnate Word, or even the life of the Messiah and Redeemer of the world, if only he could obtain knowledge of their whereabouts. His arrogance was founded upon the superiority of his angelic nature to the condition and power of mere human nature, as if both were not subject to grace and entirely dependent upon the will of their Creator. Audaciously, therefore, he set himself to tempt Holy Anne, with many suggestions, misgivings, and doubts about the truth of her pregnancy, alleging her protracted years. All this the demon attempted in order to test the virtue of the saint, and to see whether these temptations would not afford some opening for the perversion of her will. But the invincible matron resisted these onslaughts with humble fortitude, patience, continued prayer, and vivid faith in the Lord. She brought to naught the perplexing lies of the dragon, and on account of them gained only additional grace and protection from on high. For besides the protection abundantly merited by her past life, she was defended and freed from the demons by the great princes, who, regarding her most holy daughter, nevertheless, in his insatiable malice, the enemy did not desist on that account. And since his arrogance and pride far exceeds his powers, he sought human aid, for with such help he always promises himself greater ease of victory. Having at first tried to overthrow the dwelling of Saint Joachim and Anne, in order that she might be frightened and excited by the shock of its fall, but not able to succeed on account of the resistance of the holy angels, he incited against Saint Anne one of the foolish women of her acquaintance to quarrel with her. This the woman did with great fury, insolently attacking Saint Anne with reproach and scorn. She did not hesitate to make mockery of her pregnancy, saying that she was the sport of the demon in being thus found pregnant at the end of so many years and at so great an age. The blessed Anne did not permit herself to be disturbed by this attack, but in all meekness and humility bore the injuries and treated her assailants with kindness. From that time on, she looked with greater love upon these women, and lavished upon them so much the greater benefits. But their wrath was not immediately pacified, for the demon had taken possession of them, filling them with hate against the saint. And, as any concession to this cruel tyrant always increases his power over his victims, he incited these miserable dupes to plot even against the person and life of Saint Anne. But they could not put their plots into execution, because divine power interfered to foil their natural womanly weakness. They were not only powerless against the saint, but they were overcome by her admonitions and brought to the knowledge and amendment of their evil course by her prayers. The dragon was repulsed, but not vanquished, for he immediately availed himself of a servant who lived in the house with Joachim and Anne, and exasperated her against the holy matron. Through her he created even a greater annoyance than through the other women, for she was a domestic enemy, and more stubborn and dangerous than the others. I will not say to describe what the enemy attempted through this servant, since it was similar to that of the other woman, only more annoying and malicious. But with the help of God, Saint Anne won a more glorious victory than before, for the watcher of Israel slumbered not, but guarded his holy city, Psalm 124, and furnished it so well with sentinels, chosen from the strongest of his hosts, that they put to ignominious flight Lucifer and his followers. No more were they allowed to molest the fortunate mother, who was already expecting the birth of the most blessed Princess of Heaven, and who, enriched by heroic acts of virtue and many merits in these conflicts, had now arrived at the fulfillment of all her highest wishes. The day destined for the parturition of Saint Anne and for the birth of her who was consecrated and sanctified to be the Mother of God had arrived, a day most fortunate for the world. This birth happened on the 8th day of September, fully 9 months having elapsed since the conception of the soul of our most holy Queen and Lady. Saint Anne was prepared by an interior voice of the Lord, informing her that the hour of her parturition had come. Full of the joy of the Holy Spirit at this information, she prostrated herself before the Lord, and besought the assistance of His grace and His protection for a happy deliverance. The most blessed child Mary was at the same time by divine providence and power ravished into a most high ecstasy. Hence Mary was born into the world without perceiving it by her senses, for their operations and faculties were held in suspense. She was born pure and stainless, beautiful and full of grace, thereby demonstrating that she was free from the law and the tribute of sin. Although she was born substantially like other daughters of Adam, yet her birth was accompanied by such circumstances and conditions of grace that it was the most wonderful and miraculous birth in all creation, and will eternally rebound to the praise of her Maker. At 12 o'clock in the night this divine luminary issued forth, dividing the night of the ancient law and its pristine darkness from the new day of grace, which now was about to break into dawn. She was clothed, handled, and dressed like other infants, though her soul dwelt in the divinity, and she was treated as an infant, though she excelled all mortals and even all the angels in wisdom. Her mother did not allow her to be touched by other hands than her own, but she herself wrapped her in swaddling clothes. And in this Saint Anne was not hindered by her present state of childbirth, for she was free from the toils and labors which other mothers usually endure in such circumstances. So then Saint Anne received in her arms her who was her daughter, but at the same time the most exquisite treasure of all the universe, inferior only to God and superior to all other creatures. With fervent tears of joy she offered this treasure to His Majesty, saying interiorly, "Lord of infinite wisdom and power, Creator of all that exists, this fruit of my womb, which I have received of Thy bounty, I offer to Thee with eternal thanks, for without any merit of mine Thou hast vouchsafed it for me. Dispose Thou of the mother and child according to Thy most holy will. Look propitiously down upon our lowliness from Thy exalted throne. Be Thou eternally blessed, because Thou hast enriched the world with a creature so pleasing to Thy bounty, and because in her Thou hast prepared a dwelling place and a tabernacle for the eternal Word. I tender my congratulations to my holy forefathers, and to the holy prophets, and in them to the whole human race. for this sure pledge of redemption, which thou hast given them. But how shall I be able to worthily to treat her, whom thou hast given me as a daughter? I that am not worthy to be her servant, how shall I handle the true ark of the testament? Give me, O my Lord and King, the necessary enlightenment to know thy will, and to execute it according to thy pleasure in the service of my daughter. The Lord answered the holy matron interiorly, that she was to treat her heavenly child outwardly as other mothers treat their daughters, without any demonstration of reverence, but to retain this reverence inwardly, fulfilling the laws of a true mother toward her, and rearing her up with all motherly love and solicitude. All this the happy mother complied with, making use of this permission and her mother's rights without losing her reverence. She regaled herself with her most holy daughter, embracing and caressing her in the same way as other mothers do with their daughters. But it was always done with a proper reverence and consciousness of the hidden and divine sacrament known only to the mother and daughter. The guardian angels of the sweet child, with others in great multitudes, showed their veneration and worship to Mary, as she rested in the arms of her mother. They joined in heavenly music, some of which was audible to Blessed Anne. The 1,000 angels appointed as guardians of the great Queen offered themselves to her service. This was also the first time in which the heavenly mistress saw them in a corporeal form, with their devices and habiliments, as I shall describe in another chapter, and the child asked them to join with her in the praise of the Most High, and to exalt him in her name. At the moment of the birth of our Princess Mary, the Most High sent the Archangel Gabriel as an envoy to bring this joyful news to the Holy Fathers in Limbo. Immediately the heavenly ambassador descended, illumining that deep cavern and rejoicing the just who were detained therein. He told them that already the dawn of eternal felicity had commenced, and that the reparation of man, which was so earnestly desired and expected by the holy patriarchs and foretold by the prophets, had been begun, since she, who was to be the mother of the Messiah, had now been born. Soon they would now see the salvation and glory of the Most High. The Holy Prince gave them an understanding of the excellence of the Most Holy Mary, and of what the Omnipotent had begun to work in her, in order that they might better comprehend the happy beginning of the mystery, which was to end their prolonged imprisonment. Then all the holy patriarchs and prophets, and the rest of the just in Limbo, rejoiced in spirit, and in new canticles praised the Lord for this benefit. All these happenings at the birth of our Queen succeeded each other in a short space of time. The first exercise of her senses in the light of the material sun was to recognize her parents and other creatures. The arms of the Most High began to work new wonders in her, far above all conceptions of men, and the first and most stupendous one was to send innumerable angels to bring the Mother of the Eternal Word, body and soul, into the embryon heaven of the fulfilling of his further intentions regarding her. The holy princes obeyed the divine mandate, and receiving the child Mary from the arms of her holy mother Anne, they arranged a new and solemn procession, bearing heavenward with incomparable songs of joy the true Ark of the Covenant, in order that for a short time it might rest, not in the house of Obededon, but in the temple of the King of Kings and of the Lord of Lords, where later on it was to be placed for all eternity. This was the second step, which Most Holy Mary made in her life, namely, from this earth to the highest heaven. Who can worthily extol this wonderful prodigy of the right hand of the Almighty? Who can describe the joy and the admiration of the celestial spirits? And they beheld this new and wonderful work of the Most High, and when they gathered to celebrate it in their songs, In these songs they acknowledged and reverenced as their queen and mistress her who was to be the mother of their Lord, and the source of the grace and glory which they possessed. For it was through his foreseen merits that they had been made the recipients of the divine bounty. But above all, what human tongue, or what mortal, could ever describe or comprehend the heart secrets of that tender child during these events? I leave the imagination of all this to Catholic piety, and still more to those who in the Lord are favored with an understanding of it, but most of all to those who, by divine bounty, shall have arrived at the beatific vision face to face. Born by the hands of the angels, the child Mary entered the empyrean heaven, where she prostrated herself full of love before the royal throne, in the presence of the Most High. Then, according to our way of understanding, was verified what long before had happened in figure, when Bathsheba entered into the presence of her son Solomon, who, while presiding over his people of Israel, arose from his throne, received her with honor and reverence, and seated her at his side as queen. Similarly, but in a more glorious and admirable manner, the person of the divine Word now received the child Mary, whom he had chosen as mother, as queen of the universe. Although her real dignity and the purpose of these ineffable mysteries were unknown to Mary, yet her infant faculties were strengthened by divine power for the reception of these favors. New graces and gifts were bestowed upon her, by which her faculties were correspondingly elevated. Her powers of mind, besides being illumined and prepared by new grace and light, were raised in proportion to the divine manifestation, and the divinity displayed itself in the new light vouchsafed, revealing itself to her intuitively and clearly in a most exalted manner. This was the first time in which the most holy soul of Mary saw the Blessed Trinity in unveiled beatific vision. The sole witness of the glory of Mary in this beatific vision, of the sacraments then again revealed to her, of the divine effect that overflowed into her most pure soul, was God, the author of this unheard-of wonder, and the astounded angels, who in some measure perceived these mysteries in God himself. The queen seated at the side of the Lord, who was to be her son, and seeing him face to face, was more successful in her prayer than Bathsheba, for she prayed that he bestow the untouched Sunamite Abessag, his inaccessible divinity, upon his sister, human nature by the hypostatic union be fulfilled in the person of the Word. Many times he had pledged himself to it among men through the ancient patriarchs and prophets, and now Mary besought him to accelerate the reparation of the human race, expected for so many ages amid the multiplied iniquity and the ruin of souls. The Most High heard this most pleasing petition of his mother, and acting more graciously than Solomon of old toward his mother, he assured her that soon his promises should be fulfilled, and that he should descend to the world in order to assume and redeem human nature. In this divine consistory and tribunal of the Most Holy Trinity, it was determined to give a name to the child queen, as there is no proper and legitimate name, except it be found in the immutable being of God himself, for from it are participated and determined according to their right weight and measure all things in infinite wisdom. His Majesty wished himself to give and impose that name in heaven. He thereby made known to the angelic spirits that the three divine persons had decreed and formed the sweet names of Jesus and Mary for the Son and Mother from the beginning before the ages, and that they had been delighted with them, and had engraved them on their eternal memories, to be, as it were, the objects for whose service they should create all things. Being informed of these and many other mysteries, the holy angels heard a voice from the throne, speaking in the person of the Father. Our chosen one shall be called Mary, and this name is to be powerful and magnificent. Those that shall invoke it with devout affection shall receive most abundant graces. Those that shall honor it and pronounce it with reverence shall be consoled and vivified, and will find in it the remedy of their evils, the treasures for their enrichment, the light which shall guide them to heaven. It shall be terrible against the power of hell. It shall crush the head of the serpent, and it shall win glorious victories over the princes of hell. The Lord commanded the angelic spirits to announce this glorious name to Saint Anne, so that what was decreed in heaven might be executed on earth. The heavenly child, lovingly prostrate before the throne, rendered most acceptable and human thanks to the eternal being, and she received the name with most admirable and sweet jubilation. If the prerogatives and graces which she then was favored with were to be described, it would necessitate an extra book of many volumes. The holy angels honored and acknowledged Most Holy Mary as the future Mother of the Word, and as their Queen and Mistress enthroned at the right hand of her Son. They showed their veneration of her holy name, prostrating themselves as it proceeded from the throne in the voice of the Eternal Father, especially those who had it written on the devices over their breast. All of them gave forth canticles of praise for these great and hidden mysteries. In the meanwhile, the infant queen remained ignorant of the real cause of all that she thus experienced, for her dignity of mother of the incarnate Word was not revealed to her till the time of the incarnation. With the same reverential jubilee did the angels return in order to replace her into the arms of holy Anne, to whom this event remained a secret, as was also the absence of her daughter. For a guardian angel, assuming an aerial body, supplied her place for this very purpose. More than that, during a great part of the time in which the heavenly child remained in the empyrean heaven, her mother was wrapped in ecstasy of highest contemplation, and in it, although she did not know what was happening to the child, exalted mysteries concerning the dignity of the Mother of God, to which she was to be chosen, were revealed to her. The prudent matron kept them enshrined within her breast, conferring them in her thoughts with the duties she owed to her child. On the 8th day after the birth of the great queen, multitudes of most beautiful angels in splendid array descended from on high, bearing an eschaton on which the name of Mary was engraved, and shone forth in great brilliancy. Appearing to the Blessed Mother Anne, they told her that the name of her daughter was to be Mary, which name they had brought from heaven, and which divine providence had selected and now ordained to be given to their child by Joachim and herself. The saint called for her husband, and they conferred with each other about this disposition of God in regard to the name of their daughter. The more than happy father accepted the name with joy and devout affection. They decided to call their relatives and a priest, and then, with much solemnity and festivity, they imposed the name of Mary on their child. The angels also celebrated this event with most sweet and ravishing music, which, however, was heard only by the mother and her most holy daughter. Words of the Queen of Heaven. My admonition to thee, whom, in spite of thy weakness and poverty, I have chosen with such generous kindness as my disciple and companion, is this, that thou strive with all thy powers to imitate me in an exercise, in which I persevered during my whole life from the very first moment of my birth, omitting it not a single day, however full of cares and labors it might have been. This exercise was the following. Every day at the beginning of dawn, I prostrated myself in the presence of the Most High, and gave him thanks and praise for his immutable being, his infinite perfections, and for having created me out of nothing, acknowledging myself as his creature and the work of his hands. I blessed him and adored him, giving him honor, magnificence, and divinity, as the supreme Lord and Creator of myself and of all that exists. I raised up my spirit to place it into his hands, offering myself with profound humility and resignation to him, and asking him to dispose of me according to his will during that day and during all the days of my life, and to teach me to fulfill whatever would be to his greater pleasure. This I repeated many times during the external works of the day, and in the internal ones I first consulted His Majesty, asking his advice, permission, and benediction for all my actions. Be very devout toward my most sweet name. I wish that thou be convinced of the great prerogatives and privileges which the Almighty concedes to it, so that I myself, when I saw them in the divinity, felt most deeply obliged and solicitous to make a proper return. And whenever the name Mary occurred to my mind, which happened often, and whenever I heard myself called by that name, I was aroused to thankfulness and urged to new fervor in the service of the Lord, who gave it to me. Thou hast the same name, and I wish that in proportion it should cause the same effects in thee, and that thou imitate me faithfully by following the lesson given thee in this chapter, without failing in the least point from this day onward. And if in thy weakness thou shouldest fail, rouse thyself immediately, and in the presence of thy Lord and mine, acknowledge thy fault, confessing it in sorrow. Repeating these holy exercises over and again with solicitous care, thou shalt find forgiveness for imperfections, and grow accustomed to strive after what is highest in all virtues, and most pleasing and agreeable to thy own tastes and mine. Thou shalt not be denied the grace of employing thyself entirely in listening, attending to, and obeying in all things thy spouse and Lord, who seeks in thee only what is most pure, most holy and perfect, and a will prompt and eager to put the same into practice. Thanks for stopping by and watching my video to the end. Please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Doing so really helps me to reach more souls. If you enjoyed this video, or think that this work may be helpful for others, please consider supporting me through Patreon. Or, if you would prefer making a one-time contribution, just click on the Super Thanks icon below the video title. Your generous support helps to keep this channel going. To everyone who watches my videos and/or supports me, I offer my sincere gratitude. May God bless you.